Today on Max Kelly's Vegan Cooking Show, we're going to be making pizza.
Pizza! P-I-C-C-A. Give me pizza! Did I happen to say I want pizza? Spell it out for me, homies. P-I-C-C-A. I want pizza! Now set down the pizza and bring me some chicken. Throw it on top and make the finger licking. Guacamole, meatball, whipped cream pouring like waterfalls.
So first we're going to make some vegan mozzarella. If you're not interested in doing this, just skip ahead. There are some pretty good vegan cheeses you can get at most large supermarkets nowadays, and contrary to popular belief, you can even make great pizza with no cheese at all. I adapted this recipe from Skye Michael Conroy's Non-Dairy Evolution Cookbook, which you should definitely check out, by changing a few ratios and modifying the process so you don't need to cook the base on a stove. Start by covering half a cup of raw cashews with freshly boiled water and let them sit for 15 to 30 minutes, then drain. Then to a high-powered blender, add a quarter cup of melted refined coconut oil, the cashews, 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt, a quarter cup of tapioca starch, and 4 teaspoons of kappa carrageenan. I realize this is a slightly controversial ingredient, so feel free to omit it, but I've read a lot about it and I'm convinced it's safe, especially in small quantities like this. Plus it's key for achieving that melty mozzarella texture. I also like to add a teaspoon of liquid smoke to give the finished pizza a slightly smoky flavor, but this is optional. Once you've added all the ingredients, pour in 1.5 cups of freshly boiled water and immediately start blending. You need the water to be at or close to boiling temperature in order to properly activate the carrageenan. Blend for 1 to 2 minutes or until the cashews are good and pulverized, then add something acidic. Here I'm using 3/4 teaspoon of lactic acid powder, but you can substitute a tablespoon of lemon juice or even some vinegar or brine from pickled vegetables. Blend for another minute or so, then transfer to a 3-cup glass container. You want to do this while the mixture is still very hot because it sets rapidly as it cools. Get as much of the mixture out as possible and smooth it out as best you can, then cover it and chill it in the fridge for at least 2 hours. It should keep for about a week. Once it's set, you can slice it into slabs and even grate it, just like dairy mozzarella.
Low. Put in the pizza. Pizza!
So to start, we're going to mix our flours together. Today I'm using 300 grams, or about 2.5 cups each, of white whole wheat flour and 00 flour. But this is pretty flexible. You want to use a fairly high protein flour, but I've had good results with a mix of regular bread flour, whole wheat, even spelt, so feel free to play around with types and ratios. Next, we're going to add 390 grams, or about 1 2/3 cups, of room temperature to lukewarm water to a large bowl. To that, we're going to stir in 200 grams, or about 3/4 cup, of sourdough starter. This can be active starter, it can be discard from the early days of building a new starter, or it can even be starter that's been hanging out in the fridge for a few weeks. If you don't have a starter, that's fine. Just mix 100 grams each of flour and water with a pinch of yeast the night before and let it sit on the counter overnight. To our water starter mixture, we're going to add a tablespoon of sugar, 2.5 teaspoons of kosher salt, a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil, and a half teaspoon of instant yeast. Stir that all together and then add the flour. Work in about 1/3 of the flour at a time. The first third should bring the mixture to a thin crepe batter consistency. The second third should make it more like thick pancake batter. And the final third should result in a wet, shaggy dough. Make sure there's no dry flour remaining, and let the mixture sit, covered, for at least 30 minutes and up to an hour. Now that our flour has had some time to fully hydrate, we're going to do a couple rounds of stretch and folds. With damp hands, grab the edge of the dough and pull and press it into the center. Then continue doing this as you rotate the bowl until you make your way around the circle. Repeat until you start to feel some resistance from the dough. This is a sign that the gluten is beginning to develop. Flip the dough over, cover it for 10 to 15 minutes, and give it one more stretch and fold. Now that we've built a little strength in the dough, we're going to do some coil folds. Again using damp hands, grab the dough on either side and lift it out of the bowl. Let gravity pull one side of the dough down toward the bowl and fold it under the remaining dough. Repeat one more time, then rotate 90 degrees and repeat the whole process until you make it all the way around the circle. You should wind up doing 8 of these lifts and folds in total, and you'll notice the dough becomes a lot less droopy as you go. You can slide the dough around the bowl to pick up any excess flour if you want, then cover and rest for 10 minutes. Repeat the coil folds and rests 3 more times, then after the 4th set, cover the dough and let it rise in a warm place for 30 to 45 minutes, or until its volume has noticeably increased and it looks a little bubbly. Now turn your dough out onto a floured counter, dust the top with flour, and divide into 6 pieces of a little over 200 grams each. Pull the edges of each piece toward the center in almost the same way as the stretch and folds we did earlier, until you feel the dough start to resist. Then flip each portion over onto an unfloured part of the counter with the seam facing down. Flour the top of each portion to prevent sticking, and drag it along the counter while rotating to form it into a tight, strong ball. I like to place each ball in one of these small plastic deli containers for storage. The round base helps the dough keep its shape, and the lid prevents a skin from forming. Once you're done, place your dough portions in the fridge for at least 2 hours and up to 2 to 3 days. Once you're ready to bake, preheat your oven to the highest broiler setting it has, and place a baking steel, stone, or even a cast iron griddle or inverted cast iron pan on the second to highest rack. Let it heat up for at least 45 minutes. You can use jarred or canned pizza sauce, but in this case I'm going to take a 28-ounce can of whole peeled tomatoes and blend it up with an immersion blender. Then I'm going to add a teaspoon or 2 of dried oregano, 2 or 3 cloves of chopped garlic, a few pinches of kosher salt, and a little black pepper. You can season it however you want, and if you're careful, you might even avoid spilling it all over your counter. Now take a wide, unrimmed baking sheet and dust it generously with semolina or cornmeal. Turn out a dough portion onto a floured surface, dust the top with more flour, and start gently pressing from the center toward the edges to stretch it out while keeping its round shape. Then you can pick it up and start stretching it even more. It should be very thin, almost translucent, with a slightly thicker border to make a nice crust. Don't be afraid to play around to get a feel for it. If the dough rips or you wind up with a shape you don't like, just ball it back up, let it rest for at least 15 minutes, and try with another portion. Place your shaped dough on the prepared baking sheet, then working quickly, top with sauce, vegan cheese, some fresh basil, and a little drizzle of olive oil. Slide it onto your cooking surface and bake until the crust is puffy and browned with a few darker spots. In my oven running at 550 degrees, this took about 6 minutes, but this will vary from oven to oven and surface to surface, so watch the first pizza carefully to get a feel for it. Once your pizza is done, slide it out with another baking sheet, slice it up, and enjoy. You can of course play around with different topping combinations. I personally like onions and peppers with veggie sausage or bacon, but let me know your favorite toppings in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and let me know in the comments section if you have any questions or you'd like to see any other specific recipes in the future.